Hello and welcome to another episode of 3D Printing News with your host, Nathan Builds Robots. Remember, folks, this is the definitive source of 3D printing news. So let's get right into today's first story, and that is Toolchangers. Now, Toolchangers used to be a somewhat niche thing. There was basically only one on the market, which is the PRUSA XL. But it looks like XTools and Snapmaker are teaming up to produce their own Toolchanger 3D printer. Now, most of the information we have on this machine has been leaked on Reddit, and I highly suspect that this leak is actually an inside job. I think they're just doing some guerrilla marketing and wanting to get some buzz and hype about this machine. But in terms of the legitimacy of this leak, the fonts look legit. The only thing that's a little suspicious here is there's two home buttons, but it's not unheard of for firmware engineers to just reuse assets. But this appears to be legitimate because all these machines look identical. You can even see the back side of this machine, and it looks like a functional 3D printer. So let's see what we can discern by diving deep into this leaked photo. This looks like the surface is machined. I'm not sure if it'll be that way on the final product, but with any tool changer, you need to maintain pretty high precision. It looks like a pretty nice and clean design. It almost looks Bambu Lab-esque in its aesthetics. We have a nice little touch screen over here, and we've got 4 spools of filament, which are mounted on the outside. Now, what I like about this machine compared to most other multicolor solutions on the market, including the offerings from Bambu Lab, Anycubic, and Creality, is that we have the spool holders built onto the machine itself. So instead of having 2 separate devices, you have your printer and then your AMS unit, and you have to plug them in and deal with all these wires and stuff. On this machine, it's all integrated into one unit. So if you needed to move this from one room to another, it'd be really easy. And when you're unboxing this and setting it up, it's just one machine. You don't have to get 2 machines and strap them together and find a place to set everything. I do like the compactness of this machine, and it being so small and light is going to give it advantages in terms of print speed. The PRUSA XL, which is basically the only other tool changer on the market, has a maximum acceleration of 5,000 millimeters per second squared. This machine, given its smaller form factor, I'm going to guess this will be capable of accelerations of around 20,000 millimeters per second squared. So it'll be able to print a little bit faster, but there is a trade-off here. It's a much smaller printer, so you won't be able to do massive prints like you can on the XL. Also, the PRUSA XL has a maximum of 5 tool heads versus this machine, which has a maximum of 4 tool heads. But this is going to be great for people who want to run a print farm where they have a lot of color changes. Let's say you're mass producing some multicolor 3D printed part. The greatly reduced amount of waste that you get with a tool changer is going to reduce costs of materials because you're not going to be pooping out and wasting so much filament. And it's also going to increase your multicolor print speeds, because instead of having to sit and purge for a while before it resumes printing, it'll be able to just drop the old tool off and pick the new one up and get printing. Also, like the PRUSA XL, they're using a pretty similar cable routing. You have all these cables coming up from the top, and the reason you want to do this is basically every tool head needs to have its own cable. So when you have 4 or 5 sets of cables that all need to be bundled and sit somewhere inside of the enclosure, it gets pretty messy. So just having it take up a little bit of space with the cable coming straight out up the top, that seems to be what most manufacturers are going for. In terms of price, I can't see this thing being that attractive to an everyday consumer unless it was around $1,000 or less, because it appears that it only has a 220 by 220 build area, which is like your typical Ender 3 size, but nowadays people want a little bit larger printers. But the increased speed that you get with the tool changers is pretty nice, so that's a trade-off that you're going to have to consider when making a purchasing decision. You can see 3 lead screws that are all kind of hidden away in these side panels. It looks like there's some sort of fan duct there, and the bed moves up and down. I mean, overall, it looks like a pretty nice machine, and I'd love to check one out. Now, Snapmaker sent me a machine before, and I wasn't a big fan of it. It was the A350, which sounded like a great idea on paper, but just looking at the spec sheet, I could tell I wasn't going to like the machine. It was a 3-in-1 combo machine that was a 3D printer, a laser engraver, and a CNC machine all in one. I lovingly referred to it as the crap maker, and in my opinion, it was just a terrible printer, but with the addition of a laser cutter and a CNC head, it allowed you to do other things poorly as well. Also, the X, Y, and Z axes had to be strong and stiff enough to stand up to the CNC machining forces, but that meant it was pretty slow when it came to actually 3D printing, and I'd be worried about the long-term wear of the machine. So mine accidentally fell off my table. It was pretty tragic, and that machine broke. But seeing this new machine, I think this concept does have some promise, and I would actually, be willing to check it out. Maybe we'll see it at a trade show or something. So yeah, I mean, it seems pretty interesting. It's basically offering a PRUSA XL alternative that's going to be quite a bit smaller, maybe a little bit faster, and probably also a lower price point. So it'll be good to have some other tool changers on the market so that hopefully that idea picks up a little bit more. Because I hate seeing these giant bags of waste that people are producing with their AMS units. All right, next up on the topic of tool changers, Bondtech is producing their own tool changing system, and it looks really interesting. I'm gonna go ahead and play this video and just kind of talk over it. So here we can see this bank of a bunch of different, I guess, hot ends, nozzles, and they're all loaded up with different filament. But notably, what's missing from this tool changer setup is the individual changeable tools don't have an extruder built onto them. They're actually using this clever system where you have this this extruder module, which you can see here on the left, which picks up that nozzle and filament and starts feeding it. So that greatly cuts down on the number of parts that are required to make a tool changer, and it makes it much more economical to throw like 20 different filaments onto a machine when originally you'd need 20 different extruders, all the PCBs and motor drivers and hot end management stuff to deal with all of those. With this setup, it looks like you're just gonna share one extruder, which is great for efficiency. It looks like some really cool gears and stuff in there, and it appears they actually built this thing. This looks like real life footage. A lot of these parts are 3D printed. They're using a powder bed fusion technology to produce all of their parts in Sweden. Bondtech invested in a bunch of 3D printers so that they can do their own production, and they don't do injection molding because they like the flexibility of being able to 3D print all your parts. But here you can see there's some FDM manufactured components in here as well. So it's just a great application of 3D printing, showing how you can 3D print parts for other 3D printers and do some really advanced stuff. So as you can see here, you saw those extruder teeth kind of close in and engage with the filament. It says it's self-adjusting, and you know, you've got all those nice looking gears. Here we can have a closer look at this hot end piece, and this just looks really cool. Let's let the video play out and just see what they're doing with this thing. So I'm really hoping that they'll bring this to Rapid TCT. That's a trade show that's coming up in Detroit. I think it's going to be April 8th to the 10th. So if you're in the Midwest area, I'd highly recommend checking that out. You know, flights into Detroit aren't that expensive, so if you want to go see the latest and greatest in 3D printing technology, just fly in for a day and take a look at everything. So here we've got a couple status LEDs that are pulsing between green and yellow. And look at this, you can just switch between tools really quickly, print with one, and then switch to the next one. Now look at this setup that they have with all these different tool heads. And again, with tool changers, you tend to have this kind of, the wiring ends up taking up a little bit more space because all the wires, they can't overlap. So they all need to occupy the space directly above them. But what's most interesting to me is there's some crazy features here that you're not going to notice unless you look really closely. There's actually no wiring going to the tool head. This back piece is just like a piece of plastic to help the Bowden tube keep its shape. And then all you have going to this tool is just the filament, and then everything else happens on the extruder side. So if we look at this extruder, what I assume is happening here is, I mean, it's pretty obvious. You've got the extruder gears and everything inside of this part of the machine, and it'll grab onto the new filament as you load the new tool. But down here, you've got the hot end heat sink. It looks like they've got some sort of fan inside of this extruder module that's going to be blowing air through this section, which is going to help keep the cold end of the hot end cold, basically to prevent jamming. And here you can see there's the little heat break. And then down here, we have the hot end. Now, it's pretty easy to figure out how to heat the hot end up. You're just going to have some kind of heating element built into the extruder module. And then when it grabs onto this thing, it'll just pinch it with like some sort of electric heating element. And then you can heat this up and, you know, start extruding with that nozzle. But I'm noticing there's what appear to be radiator fins on this part of the machine. And what I'm assuming this is for is that they'll be able to force air through these fins to be able to rapidly cool down the hot end so that the plastic will get frozen in place, and then it'll allow them to switch to the next tool without there being molten plastic kind of hanging out in this part of the machine. So I'm really curious to learn more about this, and just the complexity of this part makes me think they might either be using metal injection molding or maybe they invested in their own metal 3D printer. Just a really cool looking design here. This is called the Bondtech INDX, and I'm really excited to learn more about this. Now, I recently visited the Rat Rig factory and took a look at all of their 3D printers and all the cool stuff that they have going on there, and they use Bondtech extruders. So I wonder if Rat Rig could incorporate something like this into their machines. That would be pretty cool. Before we move on to the next story, I want to give some credit to Bondtech. I think they're one of the most innovative companies in the 3D printing industry. Between the BMG extruder, which was like the gold standard of extruder technology for quite some time, the LGX extruder, which, you know, kind of started the trend of everyone using larger extruder gears, the CHT nozzle, which does some kind of flow splitting die to increase flow rates that basically everyone is copying now. I think Bondtech has a well-earned reputation of producing things that are quality and innovative, so I'm really looking forward to seeing how this INDX turns out. And if imitation is the greatest form of flattery, then China must love these guys because they copy all of their stuff, from the BMG to all the CHT clones out there. I mean, AliExpress is just loaded with knockoffs of this brand. But if you want to get something that's quality, I'd highly recommend buying directly from Bondtech or one of their official distributors, because then you'll be getting high quality stuff produced by Bondtech. It's not just the idea, it's actually how you manufacture it and pull it off correctly that makes their products great. To wrap up our discussion of tool changers, we're going to go to a post by Joseph PRUSA on X, where he is showing off a pen plotter system, where he's using it to draw on a print bed and then switch over to a print head to be able to print out an object. And basically what you see is when you pull this object off the print bed, it's transferred the pattern. In this case, it looks like a QR code onto the bottom of this part, and that pattern doesn't wipe off easily. You can see he's trying to rub it off and it just stays there. So I think that's a pretty cool application of tool changers, and it's something that hasn't really been explored yet. We talk about tool changers as a device where you're able to switch from one color of filament to another color of filament, or one material of filament to another material. But being able to completely switch to a different medium, like in this case, you're switching to using a pen, or you could just as easily pick up a laser or a CNC cutter or some kind of ironing tool, or some kind of tool where you could just switch to a different tool and insert your threaded parts directly into your part while it's printing, or something that drops a little magnet into your pieces. I mean, there's a ton of stuff that can be done with tool changers, and I hope to see more stuff like this come out. I mean, we've got the platforms to be able to do it. Now it's just a matter of developing the tools and the workflows to make it happen. All right, let's move on to some recall news. Now, apparently the Ender 5 Max has an issue with the hotbed where there's some kind of issue where it can overheat and maybe cause a fire hazard. You know, that's never good. We don't want our 3D printers catching on fire. So it's really not good news when any 3D printer manufacturer has these issues. In this case, Creality is offering a couple of options to their customers who they sent printers with this issue. Now, if we take a look at here, they provide 3 options. One is a free exchange, where they allow you to ship the old one back and get the new one shipped to you. A second option is they send you a free hotbed replacement with one extra $150 store coupon. So basically they're paying you for the inconvenience of having to do that replacement yourself. Now, when I put the machine together, the hotbed was just its own module where you could just take it off and kind of put a new one on. I'm not sure what's all involved with that repair option, but I think it wouldn't be too difficult to do yourself. Now it says option 3 is to return and refund it with a discounted upgrade. So I guess you could return it and then get a 10% off K2 Plus, which would probably be the option that I would go for. Over $100 off, that's a decent discount, but that's still a little bit expensive for me. While we're on this website, let's take a look at this. I don't know if this is new or if Creality is like, oh man, Bambu Lab just released the H2D. Let's put out something that's sort of equivalent. In this case, it looks like you can get a discount if you buy the K2 Plus and Falcon A1 together. The Falcon A1, I haven't taken a look at it just because I generally don't like lasers, but let's go ahead and open this in a new page. It's their fully enclosed Core XY laser system. It seems pretty nice, and I might take a closer look at it someday. But, you know, having a separate 3D printer and laser cutter is the workflow that I would recommend if you want to get into laser cutting. Having the laser cutting in the same machine, sure, it helps save some space, but there's some downsides which we'll talk about when we get into the H2D recap part of the news. Now, a lot of people complain that Creality is somewhat unoriginal in their designs, and, you know, they've learned from the best. They've copied Bambu Lab in having some kind of fire hazard recall issue with their heated beds. So, now we have some parity between the brands at least. Next, we're going to talk about some 3D printers that launched recently. One of them is the Elegoo Centauri Carbon. They have an absolute banger of a promo video. Just take a look at this. This looks straight out of Hollywood. Wow, that's so cool. I mean, we're flying through space. We've got a cube heading for the Earth. I mean, we got this millennial guy that seems very surprised by everything. I mean, this is a great little video here. It's got me pumped to buy an Elegoo Carbon. And where did they get the money for all of this? Because when you look at the MSRP of this thing, it's absolutely crazy. $300 for this machine, which is essentially a Bambu Lab X1C clone. I mean, this is a $1,200 printer, so you're looking at literally a quarter the price for this machine that has most of the same features. It's got a similar touchscreen, a similar print area, similar print speeds, full automatic bed leveling calibration. I mean, Elegoo are just really dropping the price of this stuff. And if we go to the Elegoo website, I think they had another announcement. On Twitter, Elegoo had posted this teaser image. And what I'm assuming this is the multicolor AMS clone that they're going to produce to go with their Elegoo Centauri Carbon, because this kind of looks like the rounded dome of the upper lid of an AMS unit. And it looks like there's something else in here, but we'll just have to wait and see what we get. Maybe they'll be coming out with an entry-level bed slinger, which they'll call the Neptune 5, and it'll be capable of doing multicolor printing with their AMS unit. We'll have to wait and see, but apparently we're going to find out at Rapid TCT on April 8th, so that's yet another reason to go to Detroit. All right, next up we have the Sovol Zero. Apparently it's on sale right now for $400. This machine appears to deliver some really interesting specs. So it's a relatively small printer. I think it's a 150 by 150 build area. Yeah, it says right here. It's a pretty small build area. It's supposed to be Sovol's take on the Voron Zero. Now their previous printer, the SV08, was roughly based on the Voron 2.4, and this printer appears to be based on the Voron Zero. From what I've seen of this machine, it's fully assembled. You just take it out of the box and start printing with it. And it's got absolutely insane speeds. This thing is just a little speed demon. It's basically faster than every other printer on the market. I didn't initially want anything to do with this product because Sovol had previously sent me the SV06 Ace, which I thought was just kind of a middle-of-the-ground product. It wasn't exceptional in any way, and it had great print quality, but you've got to offer more than that to make a compelling product these days. In this case, I think we've got a compelling product here. It's super fast. Apparently they're using eddy scanning for bed leveling and pressure sensing. It's super advanced despite its tiny size, and it's got insane speeds. Let's scroll down and see if we can find the speeds and accelerations. 40K accelerations, 40,000 millimeters per second squared. That's essentially 4 Gs of acceleration. That's twice as much acceleration as what you get on most Core XY printers, including the Bambu Lab X1C and H2D. And compared to your old bed slingers, those usually had accelerations between 5,000 to 10,000 as kind of like your upper limit. In this case, we've got 4 to 8 times that acceleration. So this thing is able to change directions really fast, which really helps when you're printing models and the print head has to change directions. Also, we've got some pretty insane max nozzle flow rate claims. It's got an AC heated bed that can go up to 120 degrees Celsius and chamber temperature monitoring. And Sovol has actually been really good about releasing all the open source documents with their printers. So if you want to go ahead and add an active chamber heater, I'm sure some crazy person out there is going to figure out how to do it on this machine. And it's got a built-in camera. Man, it's got like all the features you would ever want, all packed into this tiny little package. I'm actually pretty interested in checking one of these out, so we'll see if Sovol can send one over for review. It's nice having a larger printer to do larger stuff, but this seems like a really great second printer, or just a nice printer to have on your desk. These giant printers that have been coming out lately, they don't really fit on your desk. Like, you can put them there, but they take up the whole desk. Something small and cute like this that you'll be able to just, have in your office and just print out a little part really quickly. I think this will definitely have some use for the right type of person. And I think it would complement in a pair with a larger printer. You'll have this smaller one for making smaller, faster prototypes. Now, when we're talking about accelerations, this one's 40,000, but the Creality K2 Plus has 30,000 millimeters per second squared. If we take a look at speed benchy times, this can print a speed benchy in 8 minutes. The Creality K2 Plus can print a speed benchy in 10 minutes. And the Bambu Lab H2D, according to the video that I watched from CNC Kitchen, took a whopping 23 minutes to produce a benchy. And that might have to do with the increased tool head mass, where, you know, you've got 2 hot ends and 2 sets of extruder gears and a bunch of extra motors and stuff on the hot end. So it's just not able to move back and forth as quickly as a hot end that's optimized around having a single print head that's going to be small and light and capable of higher speeds. That's something you didn't hear a lot of the Bambu Lab reviewers talk about, is the speed benchy, because I think the H2D just doesn't do that good of a job of printing super quickly with a single color. Now, there was some drama on Twitter where someone was offended at Loyal Moses's thumbnail. I think it was like Sovol Zero murders Voron again, and I guess it was kind of designed to be kind of controversial, but he's coming out swinging. You know, he's saying, I don't think the betas in 3D printing understand that I am not a delicate man. When I'm not 3D printing and filming, I'm outside on my freaking ranch. Horses, tractors, diesel, guns. There's no place for softies on this mountain. This title and thumbnail are absolutely intended to trigger the delicates in 3D printing. They are not my target audience. Okay, so if you're a delicate man, maybe don't watch his video. If you're a real tough guy, check it out. Also, while you're at it, you might want to 3D print some O-rings. But let's move on to the next story. All right, so the next printer that we're going to talk about is the Elyarchi Alcheman. It's a really difficult printer to pronounce, but apparently it's this new printer that's just got crazy specifications. Apparently this machine is capable of printing super high temperature materials, including PEEK, which requires like a really hot chamber. So we'll have to wait and see how this thing turns out. Now, apparently there was a leaked video. Someone published a video. I think his name is The Next Leaker, where he's at it again, leaking all the printers. But he, I think, published a little bit of information about this before other people were supposed to. Now, apparently, Elyarchi had to delay the launch of this printer a little bit because they didn't want to launch at the same time as the H2D. So we're waiting to hear more about this machine. But yeah, I think the specialty of this machine is going to be high temperature filaments. So that means a high temperature chamber heater and high temperature nozzle, high temperature heated bed, and all of the components inside of the printer have to be rated for those higher temperatures. I'm curious to learn more about this. Now, Elyarchi did reach out to me about reviewing this machine, but I was kind of worried that it would be vaporware because I've never heard of this company and they're making these bold claims about what this machine can do. So I approached it with a little bit of skepticism, and ultimately I was like, I've got too much going on right now, so I'm going to pass on this one. Now, like any printer launch, they're sending it out to specific creators. They might be sponsoring them. So you have to read between the lines on whether the printer is actually good, and things like long-term reliability and, you know, whether the machine is nice to use are things that you might not be able to tell from those videos. Now let's talk about the Bambu Lab H2D. They just launched this printer. I did a couple speculation videos before it came out, but now that we have all the full details and spec sheets and people's review videos are out, you know, their reviews where they got the machine for free from Bambu Lab, let's take a look at what exactly this machine has to offer by watching their promotional video. Now, I mean, this is a very interesting video. They go into some interesting applications, which I was just like, my jaw kind of dropped when I was watching this video, because their first example of a printed part is a bicycle helmet. Okay, so I don't know if you all are familiar with like the regulations that are required for bicycle helmets, but you have to put them through pretty rigorous testing to make sure that they're actually safe, and that if you fall, it protects all areas of your head and will prevent you from getting brain damage if your head hits the pavement from falling off your bike. So I really don't think this is a good example of what you should do with an at-home 3D printer. Just imagine you have like a weak layer line. You hit the pavement, the helmet splits and falls off your head, and then as you continue to tumble, you know, you're completely unprotected. Also, in general, helmets like this are made out of a rigid foam that absorbs a lot of energy as you kind of hit the ground. When you're dealing with impacts like this, you want to flatten out the impulse of all the energy that's trying to enter your head from your collision with the ground. Where if you look at force over time, you're just falling, you hit the ground, the impulse of the force goes up really high, and then it falls back down. Now with a helmet, what they're trying to do is have the force go up, and then it plateaus, and then it goes back down. And if you look at the total energy absorbed, you end up absorbing the energy of the impact, but the peak force that you reach ends up being much smaller. And you really want to be using a well-designed helmet out of the right materials and using reliable manufacturing methods that aren't going to fail you when your helmet is the only thing protecting you from permanent brain damage or splatting your brains all over the ground. So I just think it's absolutely outrageous that they used a helmet as an example for their 3D printer. I mean, sure, it looks cool, but I would really value safety over whatever fantasy you might have of being able to make your own helmet. Also, the second project that he had here is he 3D printed a bicycle saddle, which is, again, it's one of those things where it's like, oh, I have a 3D printer. I can just print this out. That's cool. I can use the dual hot ends and switch over to a softer material. It's all squishy. It'll be comfortable on my butt. But here's the issue. Okay, all right, let's look at the print orientation that they're using in this video. So first of all, your layer lines are going to be going across the seat like this, and you know, the main loading of the seat in a lot of cases is going to be trying to snap the seat in half, and all your layer lines are lined up so, you know, the seat might break pretty easily. And sure, this isn't as bad as the helmet example, but you have to think about what happens when you're riding your bike down the street, you know, all happy, and you run over a pothole, and that thrusts that seat post up towards your butt cheeks with hundreds of pounds of force. What happens if the bicycle seat breaks? It's not a pretty picture. There might be blood. So yeah, I mean, don't mess around 3D printing bicycle seats and other safety equipment. Just get the stuff that's reliable, made out of traditional materials. For helmets, that would be foam. For seats, you just want to use whatever's not going to break when you're riding down the street. Now I'm kind of into cycling, and I was into, you know, putting all these upgrades on my bike. And there's these people called weight weenies who try to get every last gram of weight out of their bicycle. And they're like, yeah, my bike only weighs 10 pounds and stuff like that. But when it comes to the super lightweight components, I'm not a big fan of them because I start to worry about them being a little bit weaker and more brittle and snapping more easily. So even when it comes to traditionally manufactured goods, I always like to err on the side of strength, because what's an extra 10 grams going to do for you when you're laying on the side of the road, bleeding from your, well, you know. But cringy and possibly dangerous promotional video aside, I think it was a pretty successful launch. We have all the information about pricing and size, but I'm sure you've already watched videos about this, so we'll just go ahead and move on to the next story. So in terms of Bambu Lab upgrades, we have a couple of things. I just recently visited Slice Engineering and took a look at their Mako hot end that they're putting together. It looks pretty nice, and it's a lot less expensive than their other hot ends like the Mosquito, but it still gets pretty good flow rates. One of the coolest things that I noticed is that they're using a metal housing for the fan, which basically increases the amount of surface area you get for the heatsink. So effectively, this whole fan housing is acting like an extension of the heatsink, which is pretty cool. You know, just squeezing every last little bit of efficiency out of this thing. And the silicone sock using the fin standard that they came out with is pretty nice. Then we have some Bambu Lab upgrades from Micro Swiss. So it looks like they've got some sort of flow splitting die available April 2025. So that's coming up pretty soon. This looks like something they're working together with Bondtech to produce, where they're able to split the flow up into smaller channels and increase your flow rates on your Bambu Lab A1. And I would think they'd be able to adapt this technology to the new H2D hot ends. Bambu Lab is offering their own high flow version of the H2D hot end, so I don't know if there's going to be a market for aftermarket parts for that, but we'll have to wait and see how that turns out. Last but not least, I saw this video from Luke's lab. Apparently he's working on an upgraded hot end for the Bambu Lab ecosystem. So this appears to be an X1C, and he's saying that he's able to get 50 cubic millimeters with ASA. We'll have to trust but verify, you know, see what kind of print quality we can get at these volumetric flow rates. But if he's got some secret trick in here and is able to increase flow rates on a Bambu Lab machine, that might be worth checking out too. Also, apparently Creality is coming up with a CFS upgrade kit for their older printers. So you should be able to take apart your older printer, whether that's a K1 Max or a K1C or K1 SE, and be able to upgrade it so that you're able to use a CFS, which is basically the multi-material upgrade. So, you know, it looks like it's got this little lever sticking out the side. Maybe that's the filament cutter. Not sure exactly how this kit works, but apparently you just replace a couple parts on the printer and all of a sudden it becomes a multicolor printer. We had previously talked with CoPrint at last year's FormNext, and they had produced a multicolor upgrade kit for the Ender 3 V3 and Ender 3 V3 Plus, but it looks like this Creality kit is going to go on their K1, K1C, and K1 SE. This could be worth looking into if you already have one of those printers and want to put a little upgrade into it and start playing around with multicolor, but you don't want to invest in an entire new printer. And this is actually pretty affordable. It's only like $50 to be able to get that upgrade. Looks like it's sold out right now, but you know, could be a good option for you to squeeze a little bit more life out of those older printers. Personally, I've replaced the extruder on my Creality K1 Max. So this upgrade kit, they actually sent me one of these. It got lost in the mail for a while, but I got it installed on my machine. I just haven't made a video about it yet. They replaced the linear rods here because on the old setup, you had a system with bushings and thicker linear rods, which were pretty heavy and ended up causing a little bit of binding. So they were like, you know what, we're just going to replace all of this whole X carriage. And they have a whole video that shows like how you take this apart and, you know, replace everything and then put it back together. It looks like it's a lot of work, but doing it myself, it only took me about 2 hours to break the whole thing down, put the new parts in, and put it back together. So the K1 series is actually surprisingly moddable and easy to take apart. But yeah, you have to take all the side panels off and stuff, and it seems like it'd be a big pain, but it actually goes together really quick. So that's another option for upgrading your K1s. And apparently I've heard rumors that some companies are going to be launching upgrades for the K2 Plus. So you know, the K2 Plus here, I do think that is a little bit of a weak point of the Creality system because you have to use proprietary nozzles, and I feel like the heat break that they're using isn't super efficient. For PLA, it never ends up really being an issue, and if you do run into an issue, you can just take the nozzle out and replace it. But if you want to set this up as like a super premium machine, that would be a nice thing to upgrade. If I got a Bondtech extruder and like a Micro Swiss or a Slice Engineering hot end on the K2 Plus, I feel like that would just really round it out and make it a really excellent machine. As it is, I've been using it and haven't had any issues and getting good flow rates out of it. But there's just something about Bondtech stuff that I like upgrading to it because it's just nice and premium feeling. Okay, next up I want to talk about some printers that almost broke my spirit. Now, I got one of these printers for review. They wanted to sponsor the video and like, you know, pay me for my time and let me put together a good video. But I ended up spending hours on this thing, like days of my time troubleshooting it and trying to get it to work. Because basically the slicer version that I was using didn't match up with the firmware version that was on the machine, and I needed to do a firmware update, but I didn't have a Wi-Fi network, so I was trying to do all these hacks to get it updated, and I basically ended up wasting probably 2 to 3 weeks of productivity on this machine. And it's to the point where I'm like, you know what, I just can't do the video anymore. This is one of the things that you struggle with as a 3D printer reviewer if you're in this niche. The Next Layer actually did a pretty decent video about this where he talks about the struggles of being a 3D printer reviewer. And one of the big pains is when you get a machine that doesn't quite work and you're like, oh, maybe if I do this, it'll fix it and it'll work. And you got the company calling you and begging you. It's like, please get it working. I need to, you said you'd make a video, right? And it's like, you know what? If the printer doesn't work out of the box, what do you want me to do? You want me to spend days troubleshooting it? Like, then ultimately if I spend all that time troubleshooting it and fixing it, that doesn't give me the confidence that I need to be able to recommend it to my audience. So it gets to the point where I'm like, you know what, screw this, I don't even want to do it anymore. Another printer that put me in the same situation was the Artillery Sidewinder X4. I think it might have been the X4 Pro. I got one of these in for review. I was like, wow, this is really impressive. Like, it's a really sturdy frame. Looks like everything's well built. And then I tried to use it and it could not print a first layer to save its life. And I spent weeks troubleshooting it. I tried replacing the hot end. I tried replacing the sensor that was used to probe the bed. I got into Clipper and was in debugging mode and like checking out all the console readouts that were coming out of this machine and trying to get the bed as level as possible. And ultimately, I ended up wasting weeks of my time. And that was another situation where they offered to sponsor the video, and I worked on it as hard as I could, and at the end of the day, it's like, you know what, it's not worth it. My favorite videos when I do reviews like this are the ones that aren't sponsored. They just send the machine and they don't expect any video or anything in return. Like Creality, for instance, they basically just ship me stuff without asking. Some stuff they send me and I never make a video about it because I'm like, don't really care for this. I mean, it works fine, but I don't see the compelling reason to put some time into making a video for it. So then it really leaves it to me whether I should make the video that I want or not. when you get sponsorships, there is an added pressure to power through and make the video work. And I do feel more guilty when I don't produce the video at the end of the day. And I don't want to take money from a company where I'm not actually producing the end product for them. So in those cases, which ends up happening with about half the videos where they offer to sponsor it, is they send it over, I try it, I hate it, and end up canceling the deal just because like I'm not going to advertise crap on this channel. Any product that I feature, whether it's sponsored or not, it has to be a good product on its own merits. Otherwise, I can't recommend it. So yeah, rant over. If you want to hear more complaints like this, there's a lot of other products that I've worked with over the years that have just been absolute dumpster fires, and to the point where they're just wasting tons of my time. And I'm getting better these days at just walking away from products like that. That's one of the reasons why I turned down the Sovol Mini and the Elyarchi Alcheman that we talked about earlier. So this Elyarchi Alcheman is another good example of it. I'm like, all right, I've taken on too many projects that ended up being huge waste of time. This one, just a snap judgment of it, I'm like, man, I don't want to get this in my lab because it's just going to waste my time. But if people try it out and prove that it works good, then I'd be open to them sending one over and trying it out. It's just when it's an unknown variable, I've got all these crappy printers that are surrounding me and strangling and suffocating my creativity. It's just tough to take on additional projects. And sometimes, like in the case of the Sidewinder X4 Pro, your best instincts are telling you, yeah, this is probably going to be a printer I'll really like, because I liked the Sidewinder X2. That was one of my favorite printers back in the day because it offered huge build volume. It was faster than average. It was like really inexpensive. And it was just overall a really great machine. So I'm thinking like, hey, this is the same company. They should make a outstanding product for this thing. And I get it, and it ends up being a steaming pile of dung. Another product I kind of regret taking on was the FLSun S1. It was just way too loud for my office, so I wasn't able to do proper testing with it. If it's so loud that it sounds like a jet engine and it's bothering my neighbors, then I can't really do anything with it. And I had high hopes for it because everything that I've heard about FLSun up to that point, like the FLSun V400, but then I got the S1 and I was like, oh, this isn't quite what I was expecting. I tried to install sound dampening on it and, poured like a week of time and probably $100 in materials to try and do sound damping. Couldn't get it to quiet down. So I really have to free up my time and really be more wise with how I spend my time operating this YouTube channel. I really enjoyed building my own custom 3D printer. That was a really expensive project and took quite a bit of time, but in the end of the day, I felt like it was really rewarding, and I probably should have milked it for content a little bit more than I did. However, I'm working on another version of that printer that I think will be even more interesting, and it might even be something that you at home could make. The machine that I built, it's actually over there in the corner of the room right now. It costs about $8,000 to $10,000 to build, so it's not exactly a budget-friendly machine. I'm thinking I can make a version of it that will be under $2,000, maybe as low as $1,000. I'm also going to be moving soon, so I'm going to have trouble keeping the content schedule up. So that means I'll probably be doing another garage sale to clear out what I've got here at my current office, and I'll be looking for a new studio. And I'm also going to be looking for a full-time job, so if anyone knows any good jobs in the southern Wisconsin or northern Illinois area, let me know. Hit me up on Discord or something. I've got experience with engineering, testing, designing, got a master's degree in mechanical engineering, experience with 3D printers, obviously, robotics, aerospace. I try to be a jack of all trades in engineering, and I just really enjoy this stuff. Thanks for watching this episode, and I'm actually signing up for real this time, so I'll see you in the next episode.